The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was helping my youngest with her math homework. My mom's voice had that careful cheer she used when she wanted something but didn't want to sound like she did.
"We were thinking," she began. "It's been far too long since we've all been together under one roof. Why don't you and Sarah bring the kids up this weekend? We could have some real family bonding."
I shifted the phone between my shoulder and ear, watching my daughter wrestle with fractions.
"This weekend?"
I asked.
"That's kind of short notice." "Oh, nonsense,"
she said.
"It'll be good for the kids to see their grandparents. And your sister and her boy will be here too. He's growing like a weed."
That last part gave me pause. My parents had always had a special glow when it came to my sister's son, Ethan. He was the first grandchild, the golden one. My kids, Emma and Caleb, were polite, well-behaved, and bright, but when Ethan was in the room, it was as if my parents forgot other children existed. I'd seen it a dozen times over the years. Birthdays where my two got a handshake and a small gift, while Ethan got a pile of presents and a glowing speech. Still, Sarah raised her eyebrows from across the table when I mouthed, "My mom," and made the universal,
"What do you think?"
gesture. She gave a cautious shrug. We both learned to manage our expectations when it came to my parents.
"All right,"
I told Mom.
"We can come for the weekend."
Her relief came through loud and clear.
"Wonderful. We'll set up the guest rooms. Oh, and maybe you can bring that board game Caleb likes. Ethan loves games, you know."
I didn't bother reminding her that Emma loved games too, or that Caleb had more favorites than the one she happened to remember. I hung up with the usual pleasantries, already feeling that tug in my chest I got whenever we headed into their territory. Part hope that maybe things would be different this time, part dread that they wouldn't. Later that night, Sarah asked if I thought it was a good idea.
"It's just a weekend,"
I said, though I didn't fully believe it myself.
"The kids will get to see their grandparents. We'll make the best of it."
She nodded, but her look said she was preparing for whatever might come. And so was I. Because with my parents, family bonding didn't always mean what it should. Sometimes it meant reminding me, in small ways, who they thought really counted. And I had the sinking feeling this weekend might make that clearer than ever. We pulled into my parents' driveway just after lunch on Saturday, the autumn air crisp enough to make the kids hurry from the car to the front porch. Sarah and I had barely stepped onto the walkway when the front door swung open and my mom came bustling out, her arms already open, not for us, but for Ethan. My sister's SUV was parked off to the side, and there he was, bounding up the steps with a brand new football tucked under his arm.
"There's my big man!"
Mom cried, scooping him into a hug so tight it lifted his feet off the ground.
"I have something for you inside. Just wait until you see it."
My dad stood behind her, grinning like a proud coach, clapping Ethan on the back.
"Got your room all ready for you, champ,"
he said.
"Wait till you see the poster I hung, Broncos, just like you wanted."
Emma and Caleb lingered a few steps back, their overnight bags hanging from their shoulders. Mom gave them each a quick one-armed hug as she rushed past to shepherd Ethan inside.
"Hi, sweeties,"
she said over her shoulder, her voice already distracted.
"You can put your things in the other room. Your father will show you."
Inside, it was worse. The living room was littered with wrapping paper from some, just because, gifts Ethan had already opened. A remote control car sat on the coffee table, and a stack of new video games leaned against the TV stand.
"We wanted him to feel welcome,"
Mom explained when she caught me looking. Emma's eyes kept flicking to the pile of presents, but she didn't say anything. Caleb ran a hand along the box of the car, then stepped back like he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch it. Sarah shot me a glance, and I could see the same tightness in her jaw that I felt in my chest. My sister breezed in from the kitchen, a plate of cookies in her hand.
"Ethan, honey, did you thank Grandma for your gifts?"
she asked. He nodded, his mouth full, then plopped onto the couch. Emma and Caleb sat beside him, but their presence barely registered in the conversation as the adults peppered Ethan with questions about school, sports, and his big plans. The whole scene felt rehearsed, like they'd been saving their best selves for him. And while my kids sat quietly, waiting for a sliver of that attention, I knew deep down that this wasn't a matter of them being shy or my parents being distracted. This was the family dynamic, on full display, as predictable as it was painful. Dinner that night was a long oak table groaning under the weight of my mother's cooking: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh rolls, green beans sautéed in butter. The kind of meal she used to make when I was a kid, except back then, it felt like it was made for all of us. Ethan sat between my parents, his plate piled high before anyone else had even been served. My dad carved an extra slice of chicken for him, setting it gently on his plate like it was some prized cut.
"There you go, champ,"
he said, as if Ethan had been training for this all week. Emma reached for the rolls, and my mom's voice caught through the clink of silverware.
"Sweetie, maybe let Ethan have first pick, him. You can grab one after."
Emma's hand froze midair before she quietly pulled it back. Caleb asked if there was any ketchup, and my mom's brow furrowed.
"For roast chicken? You don't need that. Just try it the way it's meant to be."
2 minutes later, Ethan requested barbecue sauce, and Dad hopped up to grab a bottle from the fridge without a word. It went on like that, small things that stacked up faster than the plates in front of us. Ethan got a second helping before Emma had her first. Caleb asked about dessert and was told to finish all his vegetables first, but when Ethan pushed his green beans aside, Mom laughed and said,
"We'll make an exception for you."
Sarah caught my eye more than once, her expression shifting from disbelief to that resigned look we'd both learned to wear at my parents' house. My sister kept the conversation steered toward Ethan's latest soccer game, his grades, his leadership skills, in some group project, while my kids sat quietly, their stories going unheard. Halfway through, Emma tried to talk about the art project she'd been working on at school, her voice small but eager. She got 3 sentences in before Mom interrupted to ask Ethan if he wanted more potatoes. By the time she looked back, Emma had gone quiet again, stabbing at her food without meeting anyone's eyes. I sat there chewing food that felt heavier with every bite, wondering if I should say something right then or wait until later. But I knew how it would go: denial, excuses, maybe even a scolding for being
too sensitive.
And so I swallowed the words with my meal, the taste of both sitting bitter in my mouth, knowing this was only the beginning of a weekend that was already veering into familiar territory. The next afternoon, my parents suggested we all walk down to the park a few blocks from their house. It was a crisp, sunny day, the kind that made the leaves crunch under your shoes, and the air smell faintly of wood smoke. Emma and Caleb perked up at the idea, happy to get out of the house and away from the endless spotlight on Ethan. When we arrived, Ethan took off toward the playground like a shot, claiming the tallest slide as his own. My kids followed, hanging back a little as if unsure of their place. Sarah and I settled on a bench with my parents, watching from a short distance. It didn't take long for the first complaint. Emma climbed onto the swings and pumped her legs, her scarf trailing behind her. Mom's voice rang out across the park.
"Emma! Be careful, you'll knock someone over swinging that high."
Emma immediately slowed, her face falling. A few feet away, Ethan was standing at the top of the slide, tossing handfuls of mulch down onto the kids below. No one said a word to him. A few minutes later, Caleb was playing tag with Ethan and 2 other kids. When Caleb tagged Ethan a little too enthusiastically, my dad stood up and barked,
"Hey! No roughhousing. You'll hurt someone."
Ethan responded by shoving one of the other boys hard enough to make him stumble into the sandbox. My parents laughed it off.
"Boys will be boys,"
Mom said, shaking her head fondly. Sarah's hand found mine, her grip tightening each time one of these moments landed. Emma tried to join Ethan on the monkey bars, but when she reached for the same rung, Ethan pushed past her and she slipped, scraping her palm. I started to get up, but my mom beat me to it, marching over, not to check on Emma, but to remind her to
watch where you're going,
so she didn't get in Ethan's way. By the time we left, my kids were trailing behind us, their earlier excitement replaced with quiet defeat. Ethan walked up ahead between my parents, holding their hands like he was the guest of honor on parade. They were laughing about something he'd said, completely unaware, or unwilling to acknowledge, how the rest of us looked. Back at the house, Sarah took the kids upstairs to wash up. I lingered in the kitchen with my parents, the words sitting heavy in my chest. I wanted to ask if they'd even noticed how differently they treated the kids, if they understood what it was doing to them. But looking at the easy smiles on their faces, I knew I'd get the same answer. I always did, that I was imagining it, that they loved all the grandchildren equally. And maybe they believed that. But standing there in that kitchen, I knew my kids had learned something different at the park that day. The next morning started with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up the stairs, the kind of scent that usually meant a slow, pleasant breakfast. Sarah and I came down with the kids to find my parents and my sister already at the table, Ethan in the center seat with a tall glass of orange juice and a plate stacked with pancakes. Emma and Caleb sat down quietly, and before they could even serve themselves, Mom was sliding the syrup toward Ethan.
"You've got to try this, champ. It's the maple kind from Vermont."
She didn't offer it to my kids until they'd already started eating their pancakes plain. Halfway through the meal, Caleb dropped his fork, and it clattered against the floor. He leaned down to grab it, but Mom waved her hand.
"Just leave it. I'll get you another one." "You really should be more careful, Caleb."
A moment later, Ethan accidentally knocked over his juice, the sticky liquid pooling across the table. Mom laughed, grabbed a towel, and said,
"No big deal, sweetheart. Accidents happen."
It was the same dance I'd been watching all weekend, but then the conversation turned sharper. Dad looked at me over his coffee.
"You know, your sister's done a great job with Ethan. He's polite, confident, always eager to help. You could take a few notes."
I set my fork down.
"What's that supposed to mean?"
Mom jumped in before Dad could answer.
"Just that maybe Emma and Caleb could use a bit more structure. They're good kids, but they need to be, well, more like Ethan. He's always so respectful and put together."
I felt Sarah's foot tap mine under the table, a silent reminder to keep my temper.
"They're respectful,"
I said evenly.
"and they're kids. They don't need to be like anyone else."
Mom gave a knowing smile, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all.
"We just want the best for them. Sometimes that means being honest."
Ethan smirked into his pancakes, clearly aware he was the standard by which my kids were being measured. Emma's eyes stayed fixed on her plate, her shoulders hunched. Caleb shoveled the rest of his food into his mouth without saying a word. I wanted to stand up, take my kids, and leave right then. But instead, I swallowed my anger along with the last bite of toast, knowing that if I started something now, it would only end with them telling me I was too sensitive, that I was twisting things. Still, the words stuck in my throat long after breakfast was cleared, leaving a taste far more bitter than the coffee in my cup. That night, after another long day of watching my kids get sidelined, Sarah and I decided it would be better for Emma and Caleb to sleep in the guest bedroom instead of on the pull-out couch in the basement. The room upstairs was warm, quiet, and closer to the bathroom, perfect for them to get some real rest before the long drive home. When I mentioned it to my mom as she was tidying the kitchen, she froze mid-wipe, the dish rag in her hand dripping soapy water onto the floor.
"Oh no,"
she said quickly.
"That room is for Ethan."
I thought she'd misunderstood.
"Right, but Ethan's got his own bed at your place all weekend. The kids are just—"
Dad walked in before I could finish.
"The guest room is set up for Ethan. He likes having his own space when he visits. It wouldn't be fair to take that away from him."
I stared at them both, trying to make sense of what I was hearing.
"You're saying it's fair for my kids to sleep on a creaky pullout in the cold basement while Ethan gets a queen bed to himself?"
Mom set the rag down with a sigh, as if I was the one making this difficult.
"It's not about fairness. It's about what works. Ethan's used to that room. It's part of his routine. We don't want to upset him."
Something in me snapped.
"You don't want to upset him? What about Emma and Caleb? Have you even noticed how you've been treating them this entire weekend? They've been ignored, corrected, compared, and now you're telling them they can't even have a decent place to sleep because it might upset Ethan?"
Dad's jaw tightened.
"Lower your voice. You're making a scene."
Sarah had come in quietly behind me, her expression calm, but her eyes blazing.
"This isn't a scene,"
she said.
"It's the truth."
Mom crossed her arms.
"If you're going to overreact about this, maybe it's best if you just stick with the original sleeping arrangements. If that's not acceptable, well—"
she glanced toward the front door.
"You can always head home early."
Emma and Caleb were standing in the hallway now, silent witnesses to the entire exchange. I looked at their small faces, the confusion and hurt in their eyes, and I knew this wasn't just about a bed. It was about every small cut they'd endured since we'd arrived. I turned back to my parents, my voice steady.
"Fine. We'll go."
There was no apology, no attempt to change their minds, just silence as we gathered our things. Upstairs, the queen bed sat perfectly made, waiting for the one grandchild who mattered most to them. We walked past it on our way out, the weight of what it represented heavier than any bag we carried. We were halfway through packing when my dad appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking the hall. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that told me he'd come to deliver something final.
"Before you rush out of here and make a big mistake, we need to talk," he said.
Sarah straightened from where she was folding Caleb's sweatshirt into the duffel bag.
"There's nothing to talk about,"
she said. Dad held up a hand like he was the reasonable one here.
"You can stay, but only if we all agree on a few things."
I almost laughed.
"Conditions? Really? Not conditions."
Mom's voice came from behind him as she stepped into view.
"Just boundaries. We need to make sure everyone feels respected this weekend, especially Ethan."
My jaw tightened.
"And my kids? They'll be fine,"
she said quickly, brushing past it.
"But they do need to be more mindful. No rough play, no arguing, and no upsetting Ethan. He's a guest here too." "Guest?"
I said, my voice sharper now.
"He's your grandson, just like Emma and Caleb."
Mom didn't flinch.
"He's also younger and more sensitive. You know how much it means to your sister for him to have a good experience here."
The implication was clear. Our presence was conditional, our welcome revocable at the first sign my kids were anything less than invisible. Sarah's hands were still on the duffel bag, but I could feel her tension radiating across the room. Emma and Caleb were by the stairs, listening, their eyes moving from me to their grandparents like they were waiting for me to decide their fate. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice level.
"If staying here means my kids have to tiptoe around while Ethan gets whatever he wants, then we're done. We're not playing that game."
Dad shook his head, disappointment etched into his face like I had failed some test.
"Then I guess you've made your choice."
There was no pleading, no last-minute change of heart. Ethan waved lazily from the couch, already back to playing with the toys they'd bought him. My parents didn't even tell him to say goodbye. When the door closed behind us, the cold morning air hit my face like a slap. But as we loaded the car, I realized the real sting wasn't from being told to leave. It was from knowing that in my parents' eyes, we'd been on borrowed time here from the start. The car was quiet for the first 20 miles, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your chest. Sarah sat beside me, staring out the window, her hands folded tight in her lap. In the rearview mirror, I could see Emma leaning her head against the glass, eyes fixed on the blur of passing fields. Caleb sat next to her, fiddling with the zipper on his jacket, his small shoulders hunched. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. How do you explain to your kids why their grandparents treat them like they're less? How do you soften the truth without lying? Finally, I cleared my throat.
"Hey,"
I said gently, glancing at them in the mirror.
"None of this was your fault. You didn't do anything wrong."
Caleb looked up, his voice barely above a whisper.
"Grandma's mad at me." "She shouldn't be,"
I said quickly.
"Spilling juice is just an accident. Everyone makes mistakes. This wasn't about juice, it was about them."
I stopped myself there, not wanting to spill the bitterness sitting in my chest into the back seat. Emma shifted, pulling her knees up to her chest.
"They like Ethan more,"
she said, her voice flat, not a question. I gripped the steering wheel tighter.
"They shouldn't. And it's not because of you. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, even family. But that doesn't mean you're not amazing or loved."
Sarah turned slightly toward them, her voice steadier than mine.
"Your dad and I see you. We're proud of you. None of this changes that."
We drove on, the hum of the tires filling the spaces where conversation couldn't. My mind kept replaying the weekend in jagged flashes. The coldness in my mom's voice, my dad's folded arms, Ethan's smirk when they praised him for the 100th time while ignoring my kids. Every memory was another spark against the pile of anger in my chest, threatening to catch fire. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the yellow lines stretching ahead. The miles slid by, each one putting more distance between us and that house. Still, the sting lingered. I'd gone there thinking maybe we could bridge the gap, maybe give my kids some good memories with their grandparents. Instead, we'd driven away with something entirely different, less trust, more wounds, and a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. By the time we reached the city limits, Caleb had fallen asleep, his head resting against Emma's shoulder. She was awake, staring straight ahead, her face calm, but older somehow. I wanted to promise her it would never happen again. I wanted to believe it myself. But for now, all I could do was keep driving, each turn of the wheels carrying us farther from their judgment, and closer to something that might one day feel like peace. When we got home, the air in our own house felt different, lighter, somehow, but the knot in my chest hadn't loosened. The kids went straight to their rooms without being told, Emma curling up on her bed, with her sketchpad, Caleb pulling out his Lego bin. I stood in the kitchen, still wearing my jacket, staring at nothing until Sarah came in and set her purse down with a thud.
"This can't happen again,"
she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. I knew what she meant, but I played dumb.
"You mean the trip?" "I mean them,"
she said.
"Your parents. The way they treat the kids. We can't keep putting them in situations where they feel like they're not good enough just because they're not Ethan."
I leaned against the counter, rubbing my temples.
"They're my parents, Sarah."
She folded her arms.
"And Emma and Caleb are our children. Which matters more?"
The question hit me harder than I expected. I thought about Emma's voice in the car, flat, certain, when she'd said they liked Ethan more. I thought about Caleb apologizing over and over for a spilled drink while my parents acted like it was proof he didn't belong. My gut told me Sarah was right. But another part of me, the son who still remembered my mom's birthday cakes and my dad teaching me to ride a bike, balked at the idea of cutting them out.
"They've always been like this,"
I said slowly.
"Just not so obvious before. I thought maybe if we kept showing up, they'd change."
Sarah shook her head.
"They're not going to change. And showing up only teaches the kids to accept being treated that way."
I didn't answer. Instead, I went to check on the kids. Emma was shading in the petals of a flower she'd drawn, her face blank. Caleb had built a small house from Legos, neat and square, with no one inside. That night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah and I sat in the living room, the TV on but muted.
"You have to decide,"
she said quietly.
"Do you keep trying with them, or do you protect our kids from them? Because you can't do both."
I stared at the dark screen, my reflection faint in the glass. I wanted to believe there was a middle ground, some way to keep my parents in our lives without letting them hurt my children. But deep down, I knew Sarah was right. Sooner or later, I was going to have to choose. And whichever way I went, nothing about our family was ever going to be the same again. My phone rang the next evening while I was in the garage, sorting through a box of old tools. I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, my sister's voice came through, sharp and already loaded with accusation.
"I just talked to Mom,"
she said.
"What the hell happened? You stormed out, and now she's in tears."
I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath.
"We didn't storm out. They told us to leave." "That's not what they said,"
she shot back.
"They said the kids were out of control all weekend. You let them run wild, and then you blew up when they tried to set boundaries."
I actually laughed, though it wasn't from humor.
"Out of control?" Emma read quietly half the time, and Caleb's biggest crime was spilling juice. Meanwhile, Ethan was bouncing balls in the house, throwing mulch at kids in the park, and not a word was said to him. "That's different,"
she said quickly.
"Ethan's younger. He's—" "Don't say he's sensitive,"
I cut in.
"That's the excuse they've been using for years. It's just code for he's the favorite."
There was a pause, and I could picture her frowning, not because she disagreed, but because I had said it out loud.
"They treat him well because I'm raising him right,"
she said finally.
"You let your kids talk back. You don't discipline them enough."
I set the wrench in my hand down harder than I meant to.
"You weren't there, Anna. You didn't see them get ignored, corrected for nothing, compared to Ethan over and over. You didn't see Mom refuse to let them sleep in the guest room because it's Ethan's room. You didn't see Dad make an ultimatum that they could only stay if they didn't upset your son."
Her tone went icy.
"Maybe if they learned to respect their elders." "They did,"
I snapped.
"They bent over backwards to be polite to people who've made it clear they don't measure up. That's not respect. That's survival."
Silence stretched on the line, heavy and unyielding. Finally, she said,
"If you keep this up, you're going to ruin what's left of this family."
I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling.
"If this is what family is supposed to be, maybe it's already ruined."
She hung up without another word. I sat there in the quiet garage, the smell of dust and old metal in the air, knowing that conversation had just widened the gap between us into something close to permanent. And maybe, I thought, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The decision didn't come in a single flash of clarity. It crept in over the next few days, through the quiet moments when the house was still and the kids were in bed. I'd catch myself replaying Emma's flat, certain voice in the car.
They like Ethan more.
And Caleb's downcast eyes as he blotted juice from the carpet, his little hands trembling. Each time, the weight in my chest grew heavier. Sarah didn't push. She'd made her position clear that night in the living room, but she gave me space to get there on my own. I think she knew that cutting off contact with my parents wasn't something I could do halfway. It had to be absolute, or it would be meaningless. On the fourth night, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I typed out a message to my parents, deleting and rewriting it more times than I could count. At first it was angry, full of every slight and insult from the weekend, but eventually it settled into something plain and unshakable. I told them I loved them, but I couldn't allow my children to be treated as lesser in their eyes. I said that until they were willing to acknowledge what had happened, apologize, and commit to treating Emma and Caleb the same as Ethan, there would be no visits, no calls, no photos exchanged. I pressed send before I could soften it, before I could talk myself out of it. Sarah read it over my shoulder, then placed her hand on mine.
That's the right thing,
she said. The next morning, the reply came. It was short, and it was exactly what I'd expected.
We're sorry you feel that way, but we won't be told how to act in our own home.
No apology. No acknowledgement. Just pride wrapped in politeness. I set the phone down and felt something I hadn't expected, relief. There was no gray area now, no wondering if I'd misread the situation. They'd drawn their line, and I'd drawn mine. Telling the kids was harder. I kept it simple, explaining that we wouldn't be seeing Grandma and Grandpa for a while, because they'd made choices that weren't fair or kind. Emma nodded quietly, almost like she'd been expecting it. Caleb asked if it was because of the juice. I pulled him into my lap and told him no, that it was because sometimes grown-ups need to learn the same lessons we teach our kids. That night, the house felt warmer somehow, the air lighter. There was no phone call to dread, no invitation to decline with a made-up excuse. Just the four of us together, without anyone else making my children feel small. And for the first time since we'd pulled out of my parents' driveway, I felt like I was steering us towards something better. The silence started as a stubborn standoff, but before long it became its own kind of presence. Weeks bled into months without a single call, text, or card from my parents. At first, I checked my phone more often than I wanted to admit, half expecting something, anything, that might break the deadlock. But the days rolled on, and nothing came. Emma's birthday was the first real test. She turned 9 in late spring, and we threw a party in the backyard with her friends from school. There was cake, music, and the sound of kids' laughter carrying into the warm evening air. I didn't let her see me check the mailbox twice that day just in case. It was empty both times. She never mentioned her grandparents, and I didn't bring them up. Caleb's birthday followed in early summer. He was turning 7, all energy and excitement. He ripped open presents from us, from Sarah's parents, from cousins and friends. Nothing came from my side of the family. That night, after the guests left, I found myself staring at the pile of torn wrapping paper and bows, thinking about how deliberate it was to ignore your own grandchildren's birthdays. That kind of silence isn't forgetfulness, it's a choice. The kids didn't ask why they hadn't heard from Grandma and Grandpa. I think they understood more than I wanted them to. The questions they didn't ask said just as much as the ones they might have. Sarah handled it with her steady calm. She kept us busy. Day trips to the lake, hikes in the foothills, movie nights with popcorn spilled all over the couch. The more time we filled with those small, ordinary moments, the more the absence stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a space we no longer needed to fill. Still, there were nights when the quiet pressed harder than others. I'd find myself remembering birthdays from when I was a kid, the big fuss my parents would make, the effort they'd put in, and wonder how those people had turned into the ones who could so easily shut out 2 little kids for no reason other than pride. By the time autumn rolled around, I realized something important. The kids were doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Without the undercurrent of favoritism, there was no tension, no confusion about where they stood. They were free to just be themselves, without measuring up to anyone else's yardstick. And me? I was starting to see the silence for what it really was, not a punishment, but a kind of unintentional gift. It gave us room to breathe, to heal, and to focus on the family we were building right here, in our own home, on our own terms. It started with a call from my cousin Mark on a Sunday afternoon. We don't talk often, so when his name popped up, I figured it was about some old family photos he'd been digitizing. Instead, his first words were,
"Man, what happened between you and your folks? They're telling people you've gone off the deep end."
I sat back in my chair, a familiar tightness settling in my chest.
"What exactly did they say? That you blew up over some little thing during a visit, took the kids, and now you're punishing them by keeping the grandkids away. They made it sound like you're holding them hostage to win an argument."
He paused.
"Is that true?"
I let out a humorless laugh.
"No, Mark. That's not even close."
And so, for the first time to someone outside my household, I laid out the weekend in detail. The favoritism, the guest room incident, the ultimatum, and the juice spill that turned into an eviction. He didn't interrupt, but when I finished, he swore under his breath.
"They left all of that out."
A few days later, Sarah's phone lit up with a message from her aunt on my dad's side. Same story, different mouthpiece. Apparently, I was hypersensitive and
trying to turn the kids against their grandparents.
The pattern was clear. They weren't just staying silent. They were actively shaping a version of events where I was the villain. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Not because I expected them to own up to what they'd done, but because I knew how easily their version would stick. My parents had decades of goodwill banked with the family, years of hosting holidays, and showing up with casseroles when someone was sick. I was the one who had
changed,
the one now keeping the kids away. I thought about trying to set the record straight, but Sarah reminded me of something Patricia Coleman, our divorce attorney friend, had once told her.
"You can't win in the court of public opinion when the jury already made up their minds."
Instead, I decided to limit the damage where I could. When relatives reached out, I told them the truth, plainly and without venom. If they believed me, fine. If they didn't, I wasn't going to chase them down. The only people whose belief I truly needed were sitting at my kitchen table every night, eating spaghetti and laughing about Caleb's latest Lego creation. Still, the smear campaign left a bitter taste. It confirmed that my parents weren't interested in fixing anything. They just wanted to protect their image. And maybe that was the final nail in the coffin for me. I could forgive a lot, but not the decision to turn the truth into a weapon, especially when the collateral damage was my kids. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was helping Caleb line up the last few pieces on a Lego tower that was already threatening to tip. My phone buzzed across the counter, my parents' number flashing on the screen. I hesitated. Months had passed without a word, and part of me thought about letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the hallway and answered. My mom's voice came through, bright and chipper, like there hadn't been half a year of silence between us.
"Hi, honey. How are you? We were just thinking about the holidays and wanted to run something by you."
I leaned against the wall, already bracing myself.
"What's that?"
"Well," she began,
"we're putting together a special holiday gathering this year. Just something small and intimate. We'd love for Ethan to come stay with us for a few days, maybe over Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. We think it would be so nice for him."
I let the words sink in.
"Ethan,"
I repeated.
"Just Ethan?" "Yes,"
she said without hesitation.
"We thought it would be less complicated that way. You know how your two can get when they're together with him. We just want it to be peaceful and fun."
I could feel the heat rising in my chest.
"So you're calling me, after months of nothing, to invite my nephew but not my own children to Christmas?"
She sighed, as though I was the one being unreasonable.
"We're trying to make the best of things, dear. You've made it clear you don't want to visit, but that doesn't mean Ethan should miss out. It's not about excluding anyone, it's about doing what works."
I almost laughed, but it came out sharper than I intended.
"What works for you, you mean? Let me make this simple. If Emma and Caleb aren't welcome, then none of us are. Ever. I'm not going to pretend this is anything other than what it is, picking favorites."
There was a pause, then her voice cooled.
"Well, that's your choice."
"Yeah," I said.
"It is."
And I hung up. When I walked back into the living room, Caleb had finished the tower on his own, beaming with pride. Emma sat cross-legged on the couch, sketching something in her notebook. Sarah looked at me, a question in her eyes. I shook my head.
They just confirmed what we already knew.
I sat down with the kids, helping Caleb fortify his Lego creation. The call still echoed in my head, but for once, I didn't feel torn. Whatever bridge had once connected us was gone, and maybe that was for the best. I didn't even need to think about my answer when they called back the next day. My dad's number this time. His voice was all business, like he was negotiating some kind of truce.
Your mother tells me you took issue with her holiday idea,
he said, skipping right over any kind of greeting.
It wasn't an idea, Dad. It was an invitation for one grandchild and a snub for the other two. You don't get to dress that up as anything else.
He gave a sharp exhale, the kind I'd heard 100 times growing up when he thought I was being dramatic.
We're just trying to make things easier. There's been tension, and the kids don't always get along. They get along fine,
I cut in.
The problem isn't them. It's you and Mom treating them like they're in some sort of competition they can't win. I'm done letting my kids be made to feel like they're less than their cousin. If they aren't welcome, I'm not welcome. That's the deal. Don't be unreasonable,
he said, his voice tightening.
We've always done our best for you.
I almost laughed.
Your best isn't good enough when it comes with conditions on which of my kids you'll acknowledge. We're a package deal. That's how family works. You don't get to cherry-pick the members you like and pretend the rest don't matter.
There was a pause on his end, and I could picture him sitting in his recliner, jaw clenched, holding the phone too tightly.
If that's how you want to play it, fine,
he said finally.
But don't expect us to sit around waiting for you to change your mind. I'm not changing my mind,
I said.
This isn't a game to me.
We hung up without goodbyes. The finality in my own voice surprised me, but it also felt solid. Like I'd finally planted both feet in one place instead of balancing between two worlds. When I walked back into the kitchen, Sarah was at the counter, slicing apples for the kids' snack.
They call again?
She asked.
Yeah,
I said.
Tried to convince me to let Ethan have his special holiday without ours. I told him no. Told them we were a package deal.
Her shoulders eased, and she gave me a small smile.
Good. That's what the kids need to hear from you.
That night at dinner, Emma and Caleb chatted about school and winter break plans, completely unaware of the phone calls that had taken place. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Whatever storm my parents wanted to stir up, it wasn't going to touch this table. Not anymore. It was my sister who let it slip, though I doubt she meant to. We hadn't spoken since our last tense conversation months earlier, but one afternoon she called out of the blue, sounding more frazzled than angry.
You wouldn't believe the week I've had,
she started, skipping over any pleasantries. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable dig. Instead, she launched into a ramble about Ethan's latest phase. He'd been throwing tantrums at school, refusing to do homework, talking back to teachers.
Mom and Dad tried watching him last weekend,
she said,
but they called me halfway through Saturday to come get him. Said they were exhausted. He wouldn't listen, wouldn't sit still, and
she hesitated.
He even broke one of Mom's porcelain figurines. She was furious.
I almost asked if they'd scolded him the way they used to scold my kids for something as small as speaking too loudly, but I kept my mouth shut.
Sounds like they've got their hands full,
I said instead.
That's putting it mildly,
she muttered.
They said it's been harder without the other kids around. Something about Ethan not having anyone to balance him out.
I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Balance him out? Translation: without Emma and Caleb there to serve as the quiet examples, or the scapegoats, Ethan's behavior was finally being seen for what it was. Without the cushion of their constant correction, the cracks in his golden status were starting to show. My sister went on about how busy she was with work and how hard it was to manage him, and I couldn't help but think about all the times I tried to explain the unfairness to my parents. All the warnings I'd given that favoring one child over others didn't just hurt the ones being overlooked, it warped the one being spoiled. When we hung up, I sat there for a while, turning it over in my mind. I didn't feel smug exactly, but there was a certain grim validation in knowing the dynamic they'd worked so hard to maintain was unraveling on its own. That evening, Sarah caught me staring off during dinner.
Something on your mind?
She asked.
Just news from Anna, I said. Ethan's been giving them a hard time. Seems like without our kids around, it's not all sunshine anymore.
Sarah gave a small, knowing smile.
Funny how that works.
I nodded.
They built that pedestal for him, and now they're shocked it's not a stable foundation.
We didn't talk about it much more, but I slept a little easier that night. Not because I wished trouble on my nephew, but because it was proof I hadn't been imagining the imbalance all those years. And maybe, just maybe, they were finally seeing the cost of their choices, up close, without anyone else to take the blame. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in late spring, almost a year after the blow-up. My dad had called earlier in the week saying they
wanted to talk things through.
His tone wasn't apologetic exactly, but it was softer than it had been in months. Sarah didn't think I should go alone, but I told her this was something I needed to say face to face, without distractions or backup. When I pulled into their driveway, the house looked the same as it always had: perfect lawn, porch light left on in the middle of the day, curtains drawn just enough to keep the inside hidden. My mom opened the door before I even knocked, her smile tight and practiced.
"Come in,"
she said, like I was a neighbor dropping by, not a son she hadn't seen in nearly a year. We sat in the living room, the same one where Emma and Caleb used to curl up on the couch during movie nights. They didn't offer coffee or water, just an expectant silence.
"I'm here because you said you wanted to talk,"
I began.
"So let's talk. But I'm going to say everything I need to say, and I'm asking you not to interrupt until I'm done."
They both nodded, my dad leaning back with his arms crossed. I told him everything. How Emma had noticed the favoritism before she was even old enough to put it into words. How Caleb asked if spilling juice was why they didn't see his grandparents anymore. How every visit felt like a test they could never pass because the outcome had been decided before we even walked in the door.
"You called it bonding,"
I said,
"but it was more like survival. My kids learned to shrink themselves to avoid being compared to their cousin, and even then, they couldn't win. You think you were helping Ethan by putting him on a pedestal, but you were isolating him too. And now you're seeing what that does."
My mom's eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. My dad shifted in his chair.
"We never met. I'm not here for excuses,"
I cut in.
"I'm here to make this clear. Until you treat all 3 grandchildren with the same respect, kindness, and patience, there will be no relationship. With them or with me. I won't have my kids thinking love is something they have to earn while someone else gets it handed to them."
The silence that followed felt heavier than the words themselves. My mom's gaze dropped to her hands. My dad stared at the coffee table like it might offer him a way out of the conversation. I stood.
"That's all I came to say."
No one stopped me as I walked out. No one called after me. The door shut behind me with a finality I could feel in my bones, and for the first time, I knew they couldn't say they didn't understand. Now, whether they changed was up to them. It started slowly, like a drip you don't notice until the bucket's already half full. My aunt, the one who'd believed my parents' version from the start, stopped bringing Ethan up in conversation. Then my cousin Mark mentioned that Mom and Dad hadn't been invited to a big family barbecue that year.
"People don't like the way they've been handling things,"
he said carefully, as if breaking bad news. I didn't push for details, but they came anyway. Stories had made the rounds. About the weekend they kicked us out over a juice spill, about how they'd refused to let my kids use the guest room, about the special holiday invitation for only one grandchild. Apparently, once people heard the whole timeline from multiple sources, the favoritism wasn't so easy to defend. It wasn't just the extended family pulling back. My sister called one evening, her voice low and tired.
"Ethan's been acting out more,"
she admitted.
"He's sick of the constant comparisons, the pressure to be perfect. He told Mom last week he didn't want to come over anymore if they were just going to talk about how he's the good one."
I pictured my parents hearing that, and not knowing what to do with it. For years, they'd built him up like some family trophy, a shining example they could parade around. Now, the weight of their expectations was crushing him, and there was no one else left to blame or deflect onto. From what I gathered, their social calendar had thinned. The same relatives they'd once hosted for holidays were finding excuses not to visit. Conversations at church were shorter, more perfunctory. And without the easy adoration of the golden grandson to buoy them, the house must have felt quieter, emptier. Sarah asked me one night if I felt vindicated. I thought about it for a while before answering.
Not really,
I said.
I didn't want them to be miserable. I just wanted them to see what they were doing.
She nodded, but I knew she didn't quite believe me. Maybe I didn't either. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing the truth had finally seeped out, in watching the fortress they'd built on favoritism start to crack from the inside. Still, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. Whatever lessons they were learning now, they had to face them without me cushioning the blow. And maybe that was the real consequence, not the whispers from family or the empty seats at the table, but the silence from the son and grandchildren they'd pushed away. The first real snow of winter had fallen overnight, blanketing the yard in clean white. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching Emma and Caleb build a lopsided snow fort. Their laughter carried through the glass, sharp and bright against the quiet morning. It struck me then how far we'd come since that weekend at my parents' house. Back then, their faces had been confused, hurt, trying to make sense of why we were leaving so suddenly. I'd been carrying my own weight of anger and shame, unsure if I'd made the right call. Now, months later, I could see it clearly. I had drawn a line, and my kids knew without question that I was on their side. The calls from my parents had stopped. No more half-hearted invitations for just one grandchild. No more attempts to explain away their choices. Whether it was pride, stubbornness, or quiet recognition, they'd let the silence settle. I wasn't sure if reconciliation would ever happen, and I'd made peace with that. Breaking the cycle had come with a cost. Family gatherings looked different now. Some relatives stayed neutral, others took sides. But I also knew what continuing the cycle would have cost. 2 kids growing up believing they were worth less than someone else, that love was conditional. That price was too high. Sarah came up behind me, looping her arms around my waist.
"You're thinking again,"
she said with a smile in her voice.
"Just grateful,"
I said.
"For this. For them."
She rested her chin on my shoulder, watching the kids.
"You gave them something important, you know. They'll remember you standing up for them."
I hoped she was right. I didn't want my legacy as a father to be measured in the moments I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I wanted it to be in the moments I spoke up, even when it meant walking away from people I loved. Outside, Caleb toppled into the snow, laughing so hard he couldn't get up. Emma reached down, pulled him to his feet, and together they started rebuilding. I realized that was the lesson in all of this. You can't stop the collapse sometimes, but you can choose what you build afterward. The snow fort would never be perfect. Neither would life. But it was ours, and it was built on something stronger than favoritism or grudges. It was built on knowing we had each other's backs, no matter what. I took another sip of coffee and let the warmth settle in. The past might never be mended, but the future was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.